The morning was bright and calm when the triplets stepped out of their mother's car and looked up at the tall glass building in front of them. They had been to this bank a few times before, but today felt a little different. Their mother had an early meeting across town, and she trusted them with something important. She had handed them a sealed envelope and reminded them gently to go straight inside, hand over the check to the teller, and deposit it into her business account. She told them she had already called ahead to let the bank know someone would come on her behalf. The triplets took the task seriously. They were used to helping her, especially since her company had grown over the years, and she had taught them responsibility early. They walked together, side by side, each carrying something. One held the envelope, another held the folder of ID copies their mother prepared, and the third held the car keys so they could lock the doors. The three of them always moved like a team. Even people on the sidewalk turned to look at them. Maybe because it was unusual to see siblings who looked so identical. Maybe because they looked focused and determined despite being young. When they pushed open the bank doors, a soft burst of cool air greeted them. The place was quiet, with people sitting in chairs waiting for their turn. The large room smelled faintly of polished wood and paper. Most customers were busy on their phones or reading brochures. The triplets stepped inside carefully, almost as if they didn't want to disturb anyone. The first thing they noticed was a teller who gave them a friendly smile. She waved as if to say it was okay to come closer. That simple smile relaxed their nerves. They whispered to each other before walking toward the line. They had been told many times by their mother that being polite always helped things go smoothly. So they greeted the teller back with soft smiles. Behind the counter, a few employees typed on computers, counted money, and checked IDs. Everything seemed normal. No one seemed in a rush. It was just another weekday morning where people were handling their usual tasks. As the triplets waited patiently, they talked quietly about what they would do after finishing the errand. One wanted to stop for a smoothie, another wanted to check out a used bookstore nearby, and the third suggested going back home to help their mother prepare for her presentation later. They laughed softly, keeping their voices low. But as they continued waiting, something else in the bank shifted. A man standing near one of the desks behind the counter glanced in their direction. He wore a neat suit, carried a clipboard, and had a name tag that showed he was the branch manager. At first, it seemed like he was just observing the customers the way managers usually did. But then he looked at the triplets again, this time longer. He frowned a little, almost as if he was unsure what he was seeing. The triplets didn't notice him. They were focused on the person being helped in front of them, hoping the line would move quickly. But the manager's eyes stayed locked on them, and he slowly stepped around his desk, pretending to straighten brochures on a side table so he could get closer. Every few seconds, he glanced at them again, his expression stiff and unreadable. The teller who first smiled at the triplets noticed them again and asked, "Are you three together?" They nodded politely. She seemed happy to see polite young customers. "Okay, no problem. Shouldn't be long," she said gently. Her tone was warm, like she had seen them before, even though she probably hadn't. When it was their turn, the triplets approached the counter. One placed the envelope on the counter carefully. Teller opened it and widened her eyes for a moment, not in shock, but because the check inside was clearly for a large amount. She adjusted her glasses and nodded respectfully. "This is going into the business account?" she asked. One of the triplets handed over the folder containing the IDs and letters their mother had prepared. "Our mother asked us to bring this today," they explained calmly. "She has a meeting and couldn't come." The teller smiled again. "That's completely fine. Let me just run everything through the system." She was polite, helpful, and seemed genuinely interested in making sure everything was handled correctly. She typed a few things into her computer, checked the documents, and opened another screen. Everything was going smoothly so far, but then she remembered that deposits of this size often required approval from the branch manager. It wasn't unusual. It was routine. She turned slightly and waved for the manager to come over. The moment he heard her call, he walked toward them, trying to appear composed. But he didn't greet the triplets. He didn't smile. Instead, he reached for the check. First, holding it up as if examining it under special lighting. He stared at the signature, the amount, the business name, and then at the triplets. "Where did you get this?" he asked sharply. not bothering to soften his voice. His tone made a few customers in the waiting area look up from their phones. The triplets exchanged a quick glance, unsure why he sounded so tense. "It's from our mother," one of them said politely. "She owns the company. She asked us to bring it because she had a meeting." The manager didn't nod. He didn't ask anything normally. Instead, he narrowed his eyes slightly and said, "Do you three have any identification?" "Yes, sir," one replied, handing over the folder of documents. The teller had already started checking them, but the manager took them anyway. Flipped through the papers quickly, like he was searching for a mistake. Customers in line were starting to notice the unusual tone of the exchange. Some whispered quietly. Others just looked uncomfortable, sensing that something didn't feel right. The manager placed the documents down and exhaled sharply. "This check doesn't look correct," he said suddenly. The teller looked puzzled. "Sir, it matches the account information. The signatures match too. I think it just needs your approval." But the manager ignored her. He turned his attention back to the triplets. "Are you sure you didn't pick this up from somewhere? It's a large amount it's for kids to be carrying around." The triplets tried to remain calm. "Our mother does this often," one explained. "She trusts us." "She already called the bank earlier." "She did?" he asked, almost challenging them. He didn't ask the teller to confirm. He didn't check the call log. Instead, he crossed his arms and stared. "Yes," he said softly. The manager shook his head and muttered something under his breath. Then he took the check and stepped back from the counter. "I'm going to hold this for a moment," he said coldly. "I need to look into this." His voice was loud enough for customers nearby to hear. The triplets exchanged another uneasy glance. Meanwhile, the teller frowned. She could sense something was wrong. She had seen customers bring in large checks before, and this wasn't how it normally went. But since the manager had taken control, she didn't want to interfere too much. As the manager walked away with the check, he didn't go to his office or the verification machine. Instead, he went to a phone at the side of the room. He lifted the receiver and dialed quickly, speaking in a low tone that only a few words could be heard from. "I need assistance. Possible issue. Come quickly." The triplets didn't hear most of it, but they knew something wasn't right. They stood quietly at the counter, unsure what was happening or why things had suddenly escalated. The teller leaned forward and whispered, "Don't worry, I'm sure it's fine. Just stay calm." She offered a faint, supportive smile, trying to reassure them, even though she herself seemed confused by the manager's behavior. A customer who had been watching the whole time shifted in his seat and shook his head slightly. He whispered to the person next to him, "That seems unnecessary. They're just kids." Another customer nearby pulled out her phone and started recording discreetly. She wasn't trying to start trouble. She just felt that something unfair was taking place. She believed it was important to document it in case things went wrong. The triplets stood together quietly, hands folded, trying to look as calm as possible even as their hearts beat a little faster. They had done everything right. They brought the documents. They followed instructions. They were respectful. They didn't understand why things had suddenly changed. The manager hung up the phone. After a moment, and turned around with a serious look. Without approaching the counter again, he walked toward the front doors and stood near them, almost as if waiting for someone. His posture was tense. His jaw was tight. His eyes kept darting toward the triplets. Inside the bank, customers continued whispering. Some shook their heads in disbelief. The teller kept glancing toward the manager, wondering why he wasn't simply verifying the check through normal procedures. Then, before anyone could make sense of what was happening, the quiet morning was interrupted by the sound of two officers entering the bank. They stepped inside calmly and looked around. The manager immediately waved them over. The triplets felt their stomachs drop. They hadn't done anything wrong. They had followed every rule. They only came to make a simple deposit. Yet now, officers were walking toward them, and they had no idea why. This was only the beginning of what would become a day they would never forget. When the officers walked into the bank, the room grew quiet in a way that didn't feel natural. People shifted in their seats. Some straightened up. A few pulled out their phones as if pretending to scroll while secretly watching everything unfold. The triplets stood close to each other, their backs straight, though worry flickered in their eyes. None of them understood why someone would call officers over something as simple as a deposit. They had followed the instructions exactly the way their mother had taught them. Still, the presence of the officers made the moment feel heavy. The manager stepped forward quickly, almost too eagerly, like he had been waiting for them. He pointed toward the triplets without hesitation, lowering his voice only slightly. "Those three," he said. "I need you to speak with them. There's something off here." The officers glanced at the siblings. They didn't rush over. Instead, they walked calmly, their expressions relaxed. They had been in enough situations to know when to approach slowly. Something about the triplets' posture and the quiet way they stood told the officers that this wasn't the kind of scene that required raised voices or defensive stances. One officer, who looked to be the more experienced of the two, turned to the manager and asked what exactly happened. The manager crossed his arms, tapping his fingers on his sleeve. "They came in with a very large check. They claim it belongs to their mother. But something seems questionable. I tried to ask a few things, and their answers didn't match what I expected." The officer didn't look convinced. "Did you verify the account information?" The manager's jaw tightened, and he hesitated before replying. "I was about to, but their behavior made me uncomfortable." The other officer raised his eyebrows slightly, glancing toward the triplets again. They weren't talking, weren't moving, weren't even fidgeting. They were just standing quietly, waiting for someone to explain what was going on. The experienced officer nodded once and turned toward them. "Let's go talk to them," he said to his partner. The three siblings stood closer together as the officers approached. The teller who had helped them earlier took a small step back but remained near the counter, watching with worried eyes. She had been in customer service long enough to sense when a situation was being handled the wrong way. But she didn't want to get in trouble with her manager by stepping in too forcefully. The taller officer gave the triplets a small, reassuring smile. "Hi," he said gently. "I'm Officer Carter. This is Officer Lane. We just want to understand what's going on. You're not in any trouble. Can you tell me why you're here today?" One of the triplets swallowed nervously before speaking. "We're here to deposit a check for our mother. She had a meeting this morning and asked us to come for her. She already called the bank to let them know." The officer nodded. "Okay, and do you have the documents with you?" "Yes, sir," another one said, lifting the folder slowly. The teller saw them already. Officer Carter motioned toward the counter. "Mind if I take a look?" The triplet handed the folder over with steady hands, trying to remain calm. Officer Carter flipped through the papers carefully. Inside were ID copies, account details, a written note from their mother, and the usual paperwork banks asked for. Everything looked organized, clean, and legitimate. He glanced at the teller. "Did you check these?" She nodded. "Yes. Everything matches the account. The check is real. I just needed the manager to approve it because of the amount." Officer Carter raised his head slowly and looked directly at the manager, who was standing stiffly by the entrance, pretending not to hear. The atmosphere inside the bank grew even more tense. A few customers leaned forward in their seats. One woman continued recording discreetly, her phone held just low enough not to draw attention. Officer Lane leaned down slightly and spoke to the triplets in a softer voice. "Has anyone raised their voice at you? Did anything happen before we arrived?" The triplets exchanged small glances, trying to answer honestly without causing more trouble. "He just didn't seem to believe us," one whispered, referring to the manager. "He said something was wrong with the check. But everything matches." The other officer confirmed while scanning the documents again. "Officer." Carter closed the folder slowly and took a gentle breath. "Okay," he said. "Thank you. You've been very cooperative." He stepped back and addressed the room quietly, but everyone could hear. "Nobody here has done anything wrong." Tension eased a little for the customers, but the manager stiffened again. He walked toward the officers quickly. "Officer, with all due respect, you haven't even checked the check. It looks suspicious. And who sends kids to deposit something this large? I'm just doing my job protecting the bank." Officer Carter remained calm. "Did you try confirming the account before calling us?" The manager opened his mouth but didn't answer right away. Instead, he snapped, "Their story doesn't make sense. It made sense to me, Officer Lane said gently. And they have documents to support it. The manager frowned harder. Well, I'm not releasing that check until I'm satisfied. They're not asking you to release it, the officer replied. They're asking you to deposit it. That's your job. The entire room felt the shift in tone. The triplets stood silently, trying not to draw any more attention than necessary. But they could feel the support from the customers around them, even from people who didn't know them at all. Officer Carter returned the folder to the triplets and asked, "Is your mother available to talk right now?" One nodded quickly. "Yes," she said, to call her if anything happened. "Can you give her a call?" "Put it on speaker if you're comfortable." The triplet pulled out their phone, hands slightly shaky, and dialed their mother's number. The phone rang only once before she answered. "Everything okay?" Her voice echoed through the speaker, warm but slightly rushed. The triplet took a breath. "Mom, something happened at the bank. They don't believe the check is real. Officers are here." There was a short pause on the line. Not an angry pause, not a panicked one. Just a moment of confusion mixed with concern. "Put one of the officers on the phone," she said calmly. Officer Carter stepped forward. "Ma'am, this is Officer Carter with City Police. Your children are completely fine. They're standing calmly and cooperating. We just need to verify a few things." "Of course," she replied. "The check should match the account for Clearway Holdings, and there should be a note with my signature in the folder. I called earlier this morning and informed the bank." "Yes, ma'am. We saw the documents. Everything looks in order." He paused before continuing, lowering his voice just a bit. "Do you want to come down here? It may help settle the matter quickly." "I'm leaving now," she said. "Give me 10 minutes." The call ended, and the triplets finally allowed themselves a small breath of relief. But the situation inside the bank wasn't settled yet. The manager crossed his arms again. "Even if their mother comes, I still need to make sure the check isn't counterfeit." Officer Lane's patience thinned. "You could have done that already with your verification machine. Instead, you called us." "I acted based on instinct," the manager muttered defensively. "Well," Officer Carter said gently, "your instincts seem to be a little off this morning." The teller lowered her gaze. Uncomfortable but relieved that someone was finally addressing the issue directly, the triplets stepped aside and waited by a row of empty chairs. The officers stood close by, speaking quietly to each other. A few employees continued working, though their eyes occasionally drifted toward the entrance, wondering what would happen next. The manager stayed near the front doors, pacing. Each footstep echoed through the quiet bank. It was clear he felt his authority had been questioned in front of customers and officers. He didn't like that. He kept glancing outside as if hoping the situation would resolve itself before their mother arrived. Minutes passed slowly. The triplets sat together, knees almost touching, hands folded in their laps. They didn't talk much, but they exchanged small, reassuring nods. They didn't want anyone to see how nervous they were. Their mother always said, "Keep your head up. You carry yourself with your own dignity," so that's what they tried to do. A soft breeze drifted into the bank when the doors opened. A woman entered, dressed in a simple but elegant business outfit. She walked with purpose, but not in a rushed or dramatic way. It was the calm, confident stride of someone used to handling important meetings, making tough decisions, and leading others. As soon as she stepped inside, several employees recognized her. She had done business with the bank before: large contracts, corporate accounts, payroll setups. She wasn't a stranger to the branch, even though she didn't come often. The triplets stood up immediately when they saw her. She gave them a reassuring smile before turning toward the officers with professional warmth. "Thank you both for being here," she said. "May I see the manager, please?" The manager straightened his tie and stepped forward. "I'm the one who called, and I stand by my decision." Their behavior raised concerns. The mother looked at him calmly, her expression unreadable. "What concerns?" "Well," he sputtered slightly, "the amount was large." "And the documents that matched the account I opened here 3 years ago?" she asked gently, without raising her voice. He blinked. "Or the check drawn from a vendor I've worked with for 5 years." He blinked again. "Or," she continued, "the fact that I called ahead this morning and spoke to a staff member to ensure my children wouldn't have trouble depositing it." The room fell silent. Even customers who had tried to mind their business earlier were now listening closely. The manager opened his mouth, but had no ready explanation. The mother turned to the officers. "Thank you for being respectful. My children told me they cooperated fully." "They did," Officer Carter confirmed. "They were calm the entire time." The mother nodded gratefully and looked back at the manager. "Now, I would like you to deposit my check, unless there is a legitimate banking reason not to." Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The strength in it came from certainty, not volume. The manager's cheeks flushed a little. I'll verify it." Officer Lane gestured toward the verification machine. "It's right there. You could have done it 20 minutes ago." The manager swallowed hard and walked over to the counter. He took the check from where he had placed it earlier and slid it into the machine. It beeped, processed, and printed a confirmation slip in seconds. The teller glanced at the slip and said softly, "It's valid." The manager avoided everyone's eyes, but his stiff posture loosened just a little as he handed the slip to the mother. "There," he said. "It's confirmed." The mother accepted the paper but didn't smile. "Thank you. Now, please complete the deposit." The manager nodded and gestured for the teller to proceed. She processed the deposit quickly, handing over the receipt with a gentle smile. First toward the triplets, and then toward their mother. "It's all set," she said. The mother thanked the teller warmly, then looked at the officers again. "Thank you for treating my children with respect. We were just doing our job." Officer Carter replied with a small smile. She placed a hand on each of her children's shoulders. "Let's go." But as they walked toward the exit, a customer who had been watching stood up and said loudly enough for the room to hear, "Your kids handled that better than most adults would. You should be proud." The mother turned back with a grateful, humble smile. "I am." With that, the triplets followed her out of the bank, not knowing that the events of that morning would lead to even more consequences they would only learn about later. The moment the three siblings stepped outside the main hall, the lobby suddenly felt too small for all the emotions swirling inside them. The air was thick with confusion, embarrassment, and a little fear. One glance at their faces was enough to know that none of them expected any of this when they stepped into the bank that morning. The guard kept a close eye on them, not in a protective way. It was the kind of stare that made people feel like they had done something wrong, even when they hadn't. One of the boys shifted uncomfortably and rubbed his wrist, where the manager had grabbed him earlier. The girl pulled her brothers a little closer, like she could shield them from whatever was coming next. For a few moments they stood in silence. The morning sunlight fell through the large glass windows, drawing lines across the lobby floor. Outside, people walked by without noticing the small storm happening inside the bank. The siblings spoke quietly among themselves, trying to figure out what to do. They could not leave because that would make them seem guilty, but staying felt like waiting for something bad to happen. The oldest brother brushed a hand through his hair and tried to calm everyone down. He kept saying it would be fine, even though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. Customers inside the bank had mixed reactions. Some looked away politely, pretending not to notice the tension. Others stared with curiosity, like they were watching a scene play out that they weren't supposed to witness. A few whispered among themselves, trying to guess what had happened. They saw three young people standing close together, looking confused and scared, while a manager watched them from the side with stiff shoulders and a face that revealed nothing. The siblings felt the weight of that attention. They weren't used to being judged before anyone even knew who they were. They were polite students, raised in a home filled with love and discipline. They volunteered, helped elderly neighbors, and never caused trouble. Yet here they were, treated like they were not supposed to be in the same space as everyone else. The youngest brother finally spoke softly. "Why didn't he just ask us properly? Why did he call the officers without talking to us like normal people?" The girl shook her head. "Some people see what they want to see. That's the problem." They heard the sound of the manager's shoes tapping the floor behind them. He had stepped closer again, his expression tight, his voice firm as if he was preparing for something dramatic. He cleared his throat loudly, making sure the whole lobby heard him. "Officers should be here any moment," he said. "So just stay where you are. Don't make this harder than it already is," none of the siblings answered. They were trying to stay calm. They didn't want to cause a scene or raise their voices. They had been taught to act with grace, even when the world felt unfair. Minutes stretched like hours. Outside the bank, 2 police cars finally pulled up. Their presence alone drew the attention of everyone walking by. People slowed down on the sidewalk. A few even paused to watch, sensing something unusual was happening. Inside the bank, the siblings stiffened. Even though they had done absolutely nothing wrong, the sight of officers arriving created a deep uneasiness. Their hearts beat faster, and the waiting turned into dread. The officers stepped inside with calm and professional expressions. They didn't rush or make dramatic gestures. One of them nodded politely to the guard. The other spoke quietly with the manager, who eagerly pointed toward the 3 siblings as if presenting evidence. The siblings exchanged nervous glances. The oldest brother stepped forward slightly, showing he was ready to speak for all of them. The lead officer walked toward them slowly. His voice was calm, almost gentle, in contrast to the tension in the air. "Hi there," he said. "Mind telling me your names and what you're here for today?" The simple, respectful tone made the girl's eyes soften a little. It was the first time someone in this situation had spoken to them like humans instead of problems, the oldest brother explained. Everything how they came to deposit a check from their mother, how they stood in line quietly, and how the manager suddenly accused them of trying to use a fake check without giving them a chance to explain. The officers listened carefully. They didn't interrupt. They didn't make assumptions. They looked at the check, inspected the envelope it came in, and took note of the details. The more they listened, the more it was clear that nothing about the siblings' story sounded suspicious. The manager, however, kept trying to jump in. He made short comments about unusual activity and suspicious behavior. But the officers gently asked him to wait until they finished speaking with the siblings. After a while, the lead officer asked, "Do you have a way to contact your mother? We'd like to clear this up directly." One of the brothers quickly pulled out his phone and dialed her number. When she answered, his voice shook a little, but he tried to keep it steady as he explained everything. He told her the officers wanted to speak with her. The officers took the phone and spoke with the mother briefly. Their tone remained respectful. They asked a few simple questions, then returned the phone to the boy. The siblings waited anxiously as the officers stepped aside to discuss the situation quietly. The manager looked restless now. He paced, tapped his pen, and kept glancing at the doors as if expecting someone to validate his choices and prove him right. When the officers returned, their expressions were clear. This situation was far from what the manager had described. "Thank you for cooperating." One of the officers said to the siblings, "Your mother is on her way. She asked that you stay inside." Those words brought a strange mix of relief and worry. They trusted their mother completely, but they also knew she wasn't someone who would ignore a situation where her children were treated unfairly. The manager frowned when he heard that. "She's coming here." "Right now?" The officer nodded. "Yes, she said she'd be here shortly." The manager's hands tightened around his clipboard. Something in his eyes flickered concern, maybe even fear, but he tried to cover it with a forced sense of authority. He straightened his tie again and muttered something under his breath, as if trying to convince himself he had made the right decision. The siblings stood closer together again. The tension had not disappeared, but the presence of the officers made the room feel more balanced. At least someone was listening. At least someone was treating them with respect. Minutes later, the glass doors of the bank opened again. A woman stepped inside with a calm but powerful presence. She didn't rush, didn't look around nervously. She walked with purpose, her posture straight, her eyes sharp with controlled emotion. She wore a simple but elegant outfit that didn't try to impress, yet demanded attention without trying. The siblings' faces lit up the second they saw her. Relief washed over them, and their shoulders finally relaxed a little. The manager's expression changed instantly. His posture stiffened, and his eyes widened slightly as the woman walked toward the officers and introduced herself in that moment. The atmosphere in the bank shifted completely. The officers greeted her politely, but the manager, he seemed unsure how to even stand. It was as if the ground beneath him had suddenly become unstable. He had no idea who she was. Not yet, but he was about to find out. And nothing in the bank would feel the same after that. The moment the woman stepped into the bank, the air shifted in a way everyone could feel. People who had been pretending not to stare now openly turned their heads. Something about her presence made it clear she was not just any parent rushing in. She carried herself with calm confidence, the kind that did not need loud words to make an impact. Her eyes moved across the lobby until they landed on her 3 children. The relief on the kids' faces was instant. They walked quickly toward her, and she wrapped her arms around them without saying a word. It wasn't a dramatic hug, just a calm, tight one that showed she was here now, and things would be handled. Once she made sure they were safe, she gently guided them behind her, placing a hand on each shoulder as if shielding them from the tension in the room. Then she turned toward the officers with a respectful nod. "Thank you for calling me," she said quietly. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. "I appreciate you listening to my children." Officers nodded back, both of them clearly relieved that things were moving in a peaceful direction. One officer quickly explained the situation, making sure to keep the tone neutral. He mentioned that the siblings had been calm, respectful, and cooperative. He also said there was nothing illegal about the check they carried. As he spoke, the mother listened with full attention. She didn't interrupt, even when the explanation included parts that clearly upset her. She stood still, her hands gently resting on the shoulders of her kids, reminding them that she was there and in control. The manager, however, hovered a few feet away. He kept adjusting his tie and shifting his weight. At first he tried to look confident, but his nervousness showed through. It was as if he sensed he had misjudged the situation, but he still wanted to stand by his decision. Eventually, he stepped forward. "I only acted to protect the bank," he said, trying to sound authoritative. "Their behavior seemed unusual. Young people like them don't usually carry checks like that." The mother turned her head slowly toward him. Her expression didn't show anger, just calm clarity. It was the kind of look that made people rethink their words before saying them. "My children were standing in line quietly," she said. "What exactly about their behavior threatened the bank?" The manager's mouth opened, but nothing came out at first. He tried to gather his thoughts, looking for something that sounded like a reasonable explanation. "It's the size of the check," he said finally. "It didn't match what I usually see, and they couldn't answer questions the way I expected." The mother took a deep breath. She didn't raise her voice or show frustration. Instead, she spoke slowly, as if making sure every word was clear. "They answered exactly how any teenagers would answer when they're being spoken to, with suspicion instead of kindness. The people watching, from their seats or from the teller counters, looked uncomfortable. They could feel how unbalanced the situation had been. Even if they didn't want to admit it, the officers tried to keep the situation steady. One of them held out the envelope with the check. "Ma'am, if you don't mind, could you confirm that this check is from you?" She nodded, taking the envelope with steady hands. She glanced at it briefly and let out a small sigh, not out of annoyance, but out of disbelief that things had gone this far. "Yes," she said firmly. "I wrote this check. For my children, for their business project. I told them to come here today." The manager blinked. "Business project?" The mother nodded. "Yes, and they were excited about it. But now they're standing here scared and embarrassed instead."
How?
The youngest boy, hearing her words, lowered his eyes. His sister gently squeezed his arm in support. The mother continued speaking, keeping her tone even. "Is there a policy at this bank that prevents young customers from depositing money? Because if there is, we can take our accounts elsewhere." That question hung in the air like a weight. The manager's face went pale. No, of course not," he said quickly. "We value all customers." "Do you?" she asked softly. Not angrily, just honestly. The lobby went completely silent. Feeling the pressure, the manager looked toward the officers as if hoping for backup, but the officers simply waited. They were not taking sides, they were letting the truth unfold. The mother turned to her children. "Did any of you raise your voice?" she asked. They all shook their heads. "Did you cause trouble or act rude?" Again, they shook their heads. She faced the manager again. "Then why were the officers called?" He swallowed hard. "I was trying to follow the rules." "What rule did they break?" she asked. He didn't answer. The officer stepped in gently to ease the tension. "Ma'am, we can confirm they did nothing wrong. We didn't find any issue with the check. There was no threat or suspicious behavior." The mother thanked them again, her tone sincerely grateful. She wasn't here to argue with the officers or make their job harder. She appreciated that they handled the situation calmly. Then she turned back to the manager. Her voice still quiet, but now slightly firmer. "I'm the CEO of a technology firm," she said. "I manage investments far larger than this check. This bank has handled many transactions for me over the years, and I've trusted this branch to treat my family with the same respect they show me." The manager's eyes widened. He hadn't expected that, not even a little. Some customers whispered in surprise. The tellers behind the counters exchanged glances. Suddenly, the roles in the room felt reversed. The mother didn't brag or say anything else to make the moment heavier. She simply stated a fact, one that made the manager realize the gravity of what he had done. "You didn't recognize my children?" she said softly. "And instead of speaking to them with patience, you assumed something negative." The manager looked down at the floor, unable to meet her eyes. "I'm sorry," he said finally, though the words sounded unsure, like he wasn't used to saying them in situations where he was at fault. Her expression didn't change. "An apology is a start," she said, "but it won't erase what they felt today." The siblings stood quietly behind her, watching everything unfold. They weren't angry. They were still trying to process all the emotions of the day. But seeing their mom handle things so calmly made them feel strong again. One of the officers spoke to the manager. "Sir, for future situations, please try to talk to young customers before assuming anything. It saves everyone a lot of trouble." The mother gently guided her kids toward a seating area where they could sit for a moment. She asked if they were all right, checking each one's face carefully. She didn't rush them. She didn't lecture them. She just stayed close and let them gather themselves. After a minute, she stood up and walked back to the officers. "Thank you," she said again. "You treated my children with respect today. I appreciate that." The officers nodded. "We're glad everything got cleared up," she nodded back, calm but still guarded. "I just want them to feel safe anywhere they go." Then she walked back to the manager, who was now standing stiffly behind his desk, looking like he wished he could disappear into the floor. "I'm not here to humiliate you," she said quietly, "but I do hope you understand why this situation matters." He nodded slowly. "I do. Good," she said, "because moments like these shape how young people see the world, and I don't want them growing up thinking they don't belong in places meant for everyone." The manager finally looked up, and in his eyes there was a hint of genuine regrets, something human, something real. The mother led her children toward the door. As they walked out together, the entire lobby watched, not because of the drama, but because of the dignity with which she carried the situation outside the bank. The bright sunlight felt different, now warmer, softer, like it was washing away the tension that had built up inside. The siblings breathed deeply. Their mom placed a gentle hand on each of their backs. "Come on," she said with a small smile. "We're going home. We'll talk about everything there." As they walked toward the car, none of them knew that this was not the end of the story, not yet. Something much bigger was still waiting to unfold. The drive home was quiet at first. The triplets sat in the back seat, each of them looking out their own window. They weren't angry, but the weight of what happened still hung in their minds. Their mother didn't rush them to speak. She simply drove, letting them breathe and settle their thoughts. She understood that some experiences needed time before anyone could talk about them. When they pulled into the driveway, the house felt like a safe place again. The mother unlocked the door and motioned for them to come inside. She didn't lecture them or make them sit down immediately. Instead, she walked into the kitchen and began preparing something warm to drink. The kind of comfort that didn't need words. The triplets slowly followed. They sat at the table, watching her move quietly around the kitchen. Finally, the oldest spoke first. "We didn't do anything wrong," he said softly. Their mother nodded. "I know." The second one leaned forward. "Why did he call the officers?" "We only wanted to do what you asked." She set 3 cups of warm tea on the table and took a seat with them. Her face was calm but thoughtful. "Sometimes," she said, "people jump to conclusions because they don't slow down to understand. It doesn't mean you did something wrong. It means they didn't look closely enough." The youngest lowered his eyes. "It felt like we weren't welcome." She reached over and gently took his hand. "You are welcome everywhere. Don't ever forget that." They sat together for a while, sipping the warm tea. Slowly, their breathing steadied, and the room felt lighter. The mother wanted them to feel safe again, not just in the house, but in their hearts. Later that evening, after they finished dinner and the kids changed into comfortable clothes, the mother gathered them in the living room. She sat on the couch with them on all sides of her, the way they always did when something important needed to be said. "I'm proud of how you handled today," she began. "You stayed calm, you told the truth, and you didn't lose your temper. You showed more maturity than many adults." They didn't speak, but their faces softened a little from hearing her words. Even the youngest, who had looked the most shaken earlier, seemed to sit a bit taller. "You know," she continued, "when I was younger, I had moments like this too. Moments when someone judged me before they knew anything about me. I didn't always know how to respond, but someone older always reminded me to stay calm, stay honest, and stay true to myself." She paused and looked at them. "Today, I saw you do the same." The room grew quiet again, but this time it was a comfortable quiet. "I'm not upset with the officers," she added. "They listened, and they didn't try to make things worse. They treated you with respect. That matters." "But the manager," the oldest said slowly. Their mother nodded. "He made a mistake. A big one. But mistakes can be corrected if someone learns from them." The second triplet asked, "Are you going to complain to the bank?" She leaned back slightly, thinking for a moment. "I'm going to speak to their regional department, not to punish him, but to make sure the next young customer is treated better." The triplets exchanged surprised glances. They expected something harsh or dramatic, but her response was steady, balanced, and calm. It was the kind of choice that came from years of experience. That night, after the kids went to bed, she sat at her desk and wrote a detailed message to the regional office. She didn't use angry words or attack anyone. She explained what happened, how the situation escalated, and how easily it could have been avoided. She made it clear that she wanted better training, better awareness, and better communication for staff. After sending the message, she closed her laptop and exhaled softly. She didn't want her children to grow up in fear. She wanted them to grow up knowing how to handle its unfair moments with strength and dignity. The next morning arrived with a gentle sunrise. The triplets came downstairs for breakfast, expecting a normal day. But their mother stood at the counter with her phone in hand. "Something happened," she said. The kids froze, unsure if it was good news or bad. She smiled slightly. "It's a message from the regional director. He wants to meet us today." The triplets exchanged wide-eyed looks. They weren't sure what a meeting like that even meant, but their mother stayed calm, and that made them feel calm too. They drove to the regional office building after lunch. The place looked modern, full of glass walls and wide-open halls. When they stepped inside, a receptionist guided them to a waiting room. After a few minutes, a tall man in a suit approached them with a polite smile. "Thank you for coming," he said. "We appreciate you taking the time to meet." He led them into a conference room where several employees were already seated, including the branch manager from the day before. The manager looked nervous again, but this time his posture was humbler, as if he had spent the night thinking about everything he had done. The regional director began the meeting. By apologizing sincerely, he didn't make excuses. He didn't try to soften the situation. He simply acknowledged that the triplets had been treated unfairly and that the incident should never have happened. "We failed to handle the situation with the respect your family deserves," he said, "and we need to learn from it." The triplets stayed close to their mother, but they listened carefully. It felt strange to hear adults apologizing to them. But it also felt good to see the situation being taken seriously. The director turned to the manager. "I believe you have something to say." The manager took a deep breath. "I misunderstood the situation yesterday," he said quietly. "I judged too quickly. I didn't take the time to listen. I'm sorry for making you feel uncomfortable and unwelcome. You were only doing what your mother trusted you to do." The mother watched him with a steady expression. She wasn't harsh, but she didn't instantly soften either. She wanted her children to see that forgiveness was important, but so was responsibility. "Thank you for acknowledging it," she said. "I hope this becomes a moment of learning, not just for you, but for everyone here." The director nodded. "We're implementing additional training for the entire staff. We want to make sure every young customer, every family, and every client feels valued." The meeting ended smoothly. The mother thanked the director, and the triplets quietly followed her out of the room. As they left the building, the youngest tugged at her sleeve. "Mom," he said, "is it over now?" She smiled gently. "Yes, and you handled everything so well." The ride home felt lighter than the ride the day before. The sky was clear, the wind soft, and the triplets finally felt like they could breathe again. They talked about their plans, their school project, and even joked about how strange the last 2 days had been. Later that evening, as the mother cooked dinner, she watched them laugh in the living room. The worry she carried yesterday was gone now. They had been through something uncomfortable, but they came out stronger, wiser, and more confident. She took a deep breath and smiled. She knew there would be many more challenges ahead as her children grew up, but she also knew they would face them with the same calm strength they showed this time. And as the triplets laughed together on the couch, the house filled with warmth again. They were safe. They were understood. And they were reminded that even when the world misjudges them, they could still stand tall with honesty, kindness, and unity. That day became one of those memories that shaped them, a quiet reminder that their voice mattered, their presence mattered, and they belonged anywhere they chose to go. And their mother knew that someday, when they were older, they would look back on this moment not with fear, but with pride.